Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome to this week's Q&A. I gotta do this one with at least one of the windows open because it's really hot in here, so sorry if there's a hiss or any kind of street noise, but gotta do what you gotta do. But let's jump in and start reading the questions. Alright, I'll just start from the bottom up again this time. Olius asked, what can you do when the coating has been scratched off of cartridge pins revealing bare copper? Like when someone takes a scoring pad to the pin connectors. Can you reseal it again somehow? And should you re-tin them? I wouldn't re-tin them, especially because you should never mix metals, ever. But if it really depends on your situation, and it really depends on the game. So this is a scenario in which I would, another example of why I love ROM carts, because if you just have your ROM cart, you don't have to worry about this at all, and still get to know that you own the game for a collector's point of view. But if it's a rare game that you really want to preserve, or if you don't have the ROM cart, you could go a little crazy and do something like remove the ROM chip off of that PCB and put it onto another mint condition PCB that's the same style from the same manufacturer, but just a different game ROM on it. That's not available in all cases, but in many. But the problem with that is I think collectors really hate that because I think it's now not an original PCB. So I think in your case, if it's just the coating has been scratched off, but there's no rot or corrosion, I think it'd be safe to use in your own consoles as long as you know that your console is clean and you don't have anything on it. So I wouldn't put it in a strange console in case there's any kind of corrosion, because that's obviously going to, now your metal is going to be completely exposed to that. But the only time that I would be really cautious is when things are actually rusted or rotted out, because you don't want to transfer those microscopic bits across different devices. Then you have to worry about making sure everything stays clean and all that. But overall, I mean, as long as it's just that the coating's been rubbed off, like somebody brassoed a brand new game or something like that, then I think it'd be fine to use it in your own equipment. But and just keep an eye on it. Use isopropyl and a cotton swab or something to make sure that it stays clean, and just really keep an eye on it. But that's a tough situation because I've seen a lot of mint games be ruined because of that. And I will have a real cartridge cleaning video coming up soon, not just one of those, hey guys, here's my cleaning collection. Like I'll show with a microscope and explain actually what it's doing. But good question. Vanessa Palmer was asking if the 2018 TCL TVs perform the same as the 2017. And from what I've heard, they look a little better, but there's a little more lag. But nobody that I've seen went into the settings on the Roku app and tried to mess with those. And that was the thing that surprised me about at least one of the 2017 models, was that it performed pretty badly until you went into the Roku app, went into advanced settings, and turned off, I think it was gamma reduction or something. And then it, without a doubt, had less than 1 frame of lag. So I'm not sure how much of a rush you're going to be in for this, but next week or the week after, I'm going to be picking up the 49-inch version of the 2018 TCL. Of course, one of the first things I'm going to do is test for lag and see, and I'll do both the OSSC and the CRT lag test, as well as the the LED light on the controller with the 1,000 frame per second camera. I'm going to nerd out just because I like stuff like that, but I'll be able to tell you then. But the other thing too to remember is one of the reasons I don't trust some of those online lag testing sites is because if a company like TCL says, hey, these 3 TVs are the same, it's just a different size panel, they'll only test one of the panels and then put out the results for all 3, when I know for a fact that some panels just perform different. So I'll certainly be able to tell you what mine is, but I think the only thing I could suggest is I believe that model TCL is sold by Amazon, Target, and Walmart, and I think you're in the US, so I would just pick one up and try it, and do some of the quick lag tests yourself. Use your stick it next to your D24 and do the slow motion camera test and see, because you could always return it. And these things are really light, so it's not like the old tube TVs where you have to get 3 of your friends to help you carry it up the stairs. But yeah, it was a really long way of saying I don't know, but I hope to find out soon, but you should check yourself anyway. And also, you mentioned in the comments that it was an OLED TV. I think that was just a mistake because it's just an LED TV. They're definitely not OLEDs, but I think that was just a typo. Rob Mayo asked if there was any development on Repro MMC5 boards. So those are the NES games that you need to use donor carts in order to do any kind of hacks with them. And I don't think so. Jason from Game Tech would probably be a better person to ask for something like that, but I'm not 100% sure. I don't think so. I'm sorry I don't have more info. Eric Hurley asked if I'd heard anything about the Saturn PSU project. And no, unfortunately I haven't heard a thing. You know, stuff like that's hard to test. At the very least, you have to test it under load with either a scope or a very good multimeter to make sure the voltages stay consistent and good. But the better thing to do would be to create a heat chamber, cover the power supply in temperature probes, and try to make it overheat, and then read the voltage as it was coming off, as well as the temperature probes. And then there's a few more things you could test that are probably a little out of my league anyway, but those are the very bare minimum type of things that you should do. And if you really wanted to test it, you would do the same thing to a couple of different stock Saturns to compare and contrast. So my knowledge of this stuff is always like, you know, over beginner, but I'm not sure how much farther past. But at the very least, that's what I would do when I worked for the company that made their own hardware. And, you know, in my opinion, if it performed the same or cooler as a stock PSU, and the voltages stayed within the exact range that it needed, then that would be all I would need to say it was okay. But once again, I'm not an expert in power supplies, so maybe if somebody is, they could chime in and offer up some other info. But if anybody has one of those, maybe you know, let us know and see if there's any overheating or anything. Matthew Hinola asked if I knew of any US power supplies that are compatible with the AV Famicom and Famicom disk system. I think that same power supply that I've been talking about is compatible with all of that stuff. You just need the correct pigtails. The best thing to do, of course, would be to check the voltage on them and make sure it's compatible. But I mean, I've been using that for everything now. And not only have I been using it for stuff like Japanese power supplies, but I've also been using it for all of my normal consoles. Just the other day, I fired up my Genesis, and there was weird horizontal jail bars that sometimes traveled up the screen. And I went, you know, I just tested this like a month ago. What could have changed? And I have, you know, a bin of OEM Genesis power supplies, and I just went, let me check. And I grabbed that same aftermarket power supply with the pigtail adapter, plugged it in, and all of the extra interference was gone. So I would definitely look into that, but please don't take my word on this, double check. But I would assume that if the power supplies are compatible within it themselves, like I think the power supply for the Famicom is the same as something else, you could probably use this power supply with it as long as you get the right pigtail adapter. So center positive and center negative are very important, probably the most important thing. And then of course voltage. And then if the barrel fits, I would think that's the least important, because if it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit. That's a pretty easy thing to test. But yeah, I would absolutely think that's worth looking into, though, because that's a less than $20 solution for a power supply that performs probably better than most of these aging older power supplies do. Death Wombat had a weird and interesting one. Are there any inexpensive devices that will combine 4 to 6 240p or 480i sources into a single 720p or 1080p source? Now I'm assuming you're looking to do video art on a video wall or display multiple games during a tournament or something like that. And I honestly don't know. I know the people that I work with that do a lot of these type of things, they just use a bunch of capture cards. They have a bunch of the dual input capture cards. You can get the older data path ones with the VGA inputs that have dual inputs for pretty cheap. So you could get two or three of those in the same, you know, it would have to be a decently sized beefy tower, but you could almost definitely do that and then use OBS to rearrange everything. But I think what you were looking for is something like one of those devices that takes 4 1080p and makes it, you know, puts it on one big 4K display. And I don't know of anything inexpensive. Oh, I mean, I guess inexpensive is relative. If buying 3 or 4, you know, $40 cards and putting it into a tower you already own, if that's good enough, that might be the solution for you. Then you would just need custom SCART to VGA cables or adapters, which you could probably make yourself for a few dollars anyway if you were patient and didn't let cable building drive you crazy like it sometimes drives me crazy. But cool question, but I would just, if I were doing it, I would use the capture card method just so I could know that I could control each source and make sure it's outputting the way I need it to. Philip Welker had 2 questions. First, he asked if any of the optical audio mods for consoles makes the sound that much better, or if it's just something for ease of setup. Now, of course, audio is subjective. People prefer more bass, more treble, whatever else. For the most part, as long as voltages are okay, there's not strict standards like with video. So you're going to get a lot of debate about this, and I've heard a lot of people say things like it makes no difference, just use shielded cables, and that's not what I found. I found that it made a huge difference for me in a lot of different scenarios. So yes, if you use very well shielded cables, it's going to be close. But if you're playing on a surround sound system with good quality speakers, the most shielded SNES cable in the world, you're still going to get a little bit of hum on white screens, whereas you get almost none of that when you're using the digital outputs. So when you say better, I could definitely guarantee that you're going to hear less interference to the point where you might not hear any buzz or interference at all. But is the sound better? That's up to debate. I say yes. Other people say it's the same. It's really up for your ears to decide. But if any kind of interference is an issue, especially on the consoles that have the easy mods, so SNES, PlayStation 2 just has the optical audio out. For stuff like that, I would definitely just go with the optical mod. And the second question is, he was asking about the SCART to BNC board that Voltar tweeted, and he wants to know where the design files are, and anything that you need to know when you're ordering these things. Well, I think you mean this device, and to be honest, I don't know what happened to the files. My site should launch in another week or two. Not the wiki, just the updated version of the current. And stuff like this, there will be like a mini section for open source parts and all that stuff. But if you were looking to buy it right away, I believe Mobius Strip Tech is selling this actual Voltar board. You could buy it pre-assembled from him. I mean, this came up a couple days, or about a month ago, so you should probably be having a few for sale. And then Jacob Proctor also put one up on OSH Park for sale, which is a similar design, but not quite the same. So if you were looking for this exact one, I'll try to remember to send you the files. If not, just email me. I apologize. As far as where to order, OSH Park is great for little things like this. Once you start getting into multi-layer boards and all the extras, there's other places to go. But I think for a very simple board like this, go with OSH Park. I'd probably order a couple of them because the difference between 1 and 5 is negligible. And this, if you're not used to soldering, this is a great project to start with because all of the holes are fairly huge. So just get yourself a somewhat okay soldering gun, some flux, and some decent solder, and this thing, even if this was like your first or second time, you could be done in an hour. So, and experts could probably be done in about 5 minutes. But very cool questions, and I will try my best to remember to send you this. And if not, please just email me. Chris from Belgium had a couple of questions. First, he asked if anybody had bought things from Retrogate, the store that sells flash carts, and wants to know if they're reliable. I ordered from them in the past, and I didn't have any problems. But I had heard of people saying there might have been issues, and there were delays on orders and bad communication. But maybe that was just one person blowing it out of proportion. I really don't know. But if you have any question, if anybody has any question on any of that stuff, I would ask on the forums and just see if there's other alternatives. But I don't know of anything positive or negative from Retrogate. I think things had changed. It changed owners, or they changed partnerships or something. But I don't know. I would just ask. Maybe somebody here could chime in. If not, jump on one of the forums and see. And his second question is, he dumped one of his SNES cartridges, and it looked like the checksum was different than the ones from the no intro ROMs that are out there, and wants to know if he has a different version of the game. It's possible. I think you would need to contact people who are experts. SNES Central might be a good place to contact, and of course Smoke Monster, although he's traveling this week, so I'm not sure if he'll be able to get to it. But I mean, it would be very cool if you did find a version of a game that no one else had. So if it's I don't think you put which game it was, but if it's something really cool, yeah, I would maybe contact SNES Central and see what they say. But thanks for the questions. Sterling Ference asked if there was a good place to get a replacement panel for a top-loading NES that includes the multi-out with PCB. So replacement panel, I think you mean the AV multi-out jack and back. If you don't, I'm sorry, ask again and I'll figure it out next week. But so there's two. There's one that you can get from Buffalo Wing, I believe. That's it's not just a 3D printed part. I think he uses higher quality machinery and plastics. It's really expensive though. It's like $50 or something. And of course, for PCBs, you could get the one they sell, or any of the DB Electronics has his that was open sourced. So if you look for that one, part of his spec is to make sure it's built correctly with all of the correct components and metal on it. So I don't know if you're going to be able to get both in the same place. I always tend to support open source designs, so I would go with the DB Electronics board, which he doesn't sell, it's just open sourced, and then really decide the quality that you want for the rear panel. If you want something that looks, as close to a factory finish as you can get, the one from Buffalo Wing is excellent. But if you're looking for just a basic 3D printed one, I think there's open source designs for those as well. Michael Thomas DeLeo was asking about Game Boy Advance backlit screens and wanted to know if there was any real difference between the AGS 101 screen and then some of the generics. And I went over this in my interview with Ben Venn, where he talked about some of the screens with the white tabs and how you can get them from China and they're exactly the good quality ones. So I would recommend going back and re-listening to that interview, because that would have the best answers to the questions. But basically, the short answer is, as long as you get the correct panels, they are identical in quality to the AGS 101s. So it's worth hunting those down, but they're very cheap. So you're still going to pay less than a cannibalized AGS 101 screen. Eric Hurley had a great question for collectors. He modded all of his PAL consoles to run NTSC games as well, and now he mostly plays the NTSC versions because they run at 60 Hz, not 50 Hz. And if anybody hasn't experienced the difference, try playing Sonic the Hedgehog on a Mega Drive running at PAL 50 Hz versus US or Japan running at 60 Hz. You'll immediately understand the difference. But his question is, since he plays on EverDrives anyway, but still likes collecting, what do people and other collectors suggest you do? Collect the PAL games, collect the NTSC games? Do you play them on the original cartridges? And Chris from Belgium chimed in, where he's in a similar situation, and he always goes back and forth on what to do. And I gotta say, that's my views on collecting are different than your average collector, because I do like the nerdy angle on things. So if I were in your shoes, what I would collect is if there was ever a PAL version of a game that was different or unique or special, like some of the Zeldas had like different regional changes and things like that. I would absolutely collect whatever was the cooler, rarer version. But regardless of what version it was, I would still rather play on a ROM cart, just because I do not want to mess with any of my carts anymore. They're all pristine, cleaned as well as I can, using the right methods. So yeah, it's a real rough one. I certainly don't have a good or bad answer. I think that's just my opinion, is collect whichever's the cooler version. Or if you're a completionist, get all of them, but that's a lot of money and a lot of carts. So yeah, that's a great question. I'd love to hear other people's opinions on that as well. Connery Kateni said that when he plays Sonic 3D Blast, it keeps changing the aspect ratio on his OSSC, and are there any recommendations to eliminate this? Do you mean Sonic 3D Blast for Genesis? I think maybe there's also a Saturn version as well, but I have never run into that problem before. I can't remember. I mean, I don't really play Sonic 3D Blast. No offense or anything, it's just not my favorite game. But I can't remember if I've ever played it through the OSSC. But if anybody else is watching this, maybe chime in and see, have you had this issue on your OSSC before? And Connery, please let me know which console it is too. Maybe I'll be able to just fire it up and test. Mike W. wants to know if the OSSC passes non-standard refresh rates through, and the answer is yes. Whatever refresh rate you put into the OSSC, it doubles the resolution, or times 3, 4, 5, but the refresh rate stays the same. And that's because you would need some kind of frame buffer in order to rewrite the resolution. And if you did use that, yeah, there could be a frame drop, or it could be a hair slowed down, a hair sped up. which is why speedrunners can use the OSSC because it doesn't change timing at all. And that's also why if you look at things like the high def NES, and you let a game title screen run for like 3 days or something like that, you could get side by side with an original NES and see that it is a hair different. Which, when you're talking about fractions of a second for speedrunners, that's important. When you're talking about people playing, that's not important at all. But the other side of this is that's the same reason why there's no lag on it. There's no frame buffer, so you get no lag, but you also get bad compatibility with certain TVs or certain modes in certain TVs. So it's kind of a crapshoot. I personally think that any compatibility issues are well worth it just for the zero lag and just how well it performs everywhere else. Yeah, I mean, and also you were asking if the Super NT could optionally output the non-standard signal. I think there's settings in there that allow you to do that specifically for speedrunners, but I mean, speedrunning is such a finite thing. Myself personally would not ever do that on anything other than an original console anyway. Just because if I ever got some amazing accomplishment, I would never want to have to deal with people saying like, well, he didn't use the right console. I would want no doubt in my mind that I was using all original and I didn't cheat. So it's just all my opinions on the subject. But yep, the short answer, whatever refresh rate the OSSC receives, it spits out. Here's a question I get all the time, and unfortunately the answer is not good. The question was, do I have any advice or recommendations for finding a PVM or BVM for people that don't live near a big city? And the answer is no, there's nothing. And I think the main reason for this is because right about that time period where everybody was switching their equipment from CRT to flat screen, I think that period is already passed, at least in North America, for as far as I could tell. Because that's when all these deals were happening, and that's why these were so accessible. Because you could have a monitor that was only a few years old that somebody spent $20,000 on, but they got to get rid of it. They have all the new equipment in, everything's already calibrated. This is just taking up space, and especially in cities, space is a lot of money. So that's why people were able to get such amazing deals on those, and that's I think why they were so plentiful, because everybody was just getting rid of them. And now they're very hard to find, and the people that do find them tend to just Google the model number, see that they're good for retro gaming, and unfortunately a lot of people jack the price up. The other side of that too is shipping is rough. I just shipped a 20-inch PVM using a service that shipped CRTs before, and it showed up really badly damaged. Pat, the BVM tech, said that certain parts of the country, said New York City, especially, he won't even ship to anymore. He'll ship to like Jersey and make people go pick it up, because there must be certain locations where they just throw boxes, or there's probably a drop between the pallet and the deck. I've seen that before. That's another long story for another day. But the only thing you could do is you could try to save up and get something from a reputable seller, but you're going to pay a lot. So if you get something from Pat, expect to spend at least $2,000. The broadcast store, I've heard nothing but nightmare stories about. Maybe only one good story with them, but you'll pay, even more. You'll pay double probably. So the only thing that I could think of is just post on the forums and just let everybody know where you live and that you're looking for one, and hopefully somebody could stumble across something. But you said you already have a 32-inch Sharp CRT with component inputs. To be honest, in that scenario, that's a big TV. And there are certain scenarios where size does matter. And if you're playing light gun games or any of those 3D games like Sega or Famicom, having a bigger monitor would probably be a better experience overall. So if you're looking for quality, maybe you could look into finding a 36-inch and RGB modding it. But if you're really just stuck on getting a PVM or BVM, the only thing would be to just talk to people within a certain range driving distance that might be willing to help. But it's going to cost a lot of money either way, because you're either going to make it into a road trip or you're going to spend a lot of money on shipping. But it's, I hate to say this because I wish there was some magical way to get these, both so we could all enjoy them and so we could preserve some of this awesome technology. It really kills me to think how many of those tubes probably went in the trash that were perfectly good. So anyway, sorry for the bad news, but maybe just post on some of the forums and see if people could help. Alex Douse asked, what is the best way to break out audio from a SCART cable? His PVM doesn't support audio via RGB. Is there a SCART switch the most logical solution? To be honest, I don't know of any SCART to BNC solutions that don't include audio. The ones that you could find on eBay all have it. The ones from Retro Gaming Cables in the UK have RCA as well as BNC. The new Voltar board as well as the other one, that's SCART in with RCA and then BNC. And even Retro Access has breakout boxes for this. So, and these breakout boxes do a few things. Some of them have SCART to JP21 or JP21 to SCART, and then the adapters themselves break out audio when you pass through. So if you, for some reason, have some kind of RGB monitor with a SCART input, that would be the best solution. But yeah, I'm actually very surprised that your solution doesn't include that anyway. So it should be a pretty easy fix for you. Samson Wick was asking about a Sega CD optical drive emulator project that he saw. And yep, that's Ash Evans, that's Electron Ash's project. And he's gotten pretty far with it, but he's got a long ways to go in order to make it something that is even in test form. And that's his words. That's not me like digging at him or anything. I'm obviously a fan of Ash's work, and I'm really looking forward to seeing a lot of his projects. But I think he's got a bunch of them that are all in midway through. But as soon as any of them even come close to prototype stage, don't worry, I will definitely be talking to people about it because I want this stuff as much as everybody else does. Adam Brady was asking again about no-cut mods, and he asked if the expansion port could be a no-cut option for HDMI, NES, or N64. And no, the way HDMI signals work, it's very, very finicky. So you need to keep things within a certain distance, and you can't reroute the HDMI connector. Because that was one of the first things I'd asked, both Marshall and Kevtris was, can't I just remove the multi-out and we mount the HDMI port there? That way you don't have to cut any plastic. But the answer is no, definitely not. So at the moment, the only no-cut high-def NES mod that I know of is the one that Greg Collins is making that 3D printed adapter for the top loader. But other than that, no, you're kind of stuck. Rennie Batik, I think I pronounced that right. Please correct me if I didn't. I try really hard to get them right. I just suck at it. But was asking the Omega CMVS RGB output and how that compares to things like an AES with an RGB bypass. And that's something that I'd really have to dig deep in order to answer the question. The only basics are Neo Geos vary wildly in quality, even on the same board revision sometimes. I would just, it's always a crapshoot on which one or what quality you're going to get. And as far as the bypass mods, there's a few different kinds. There's some where you could, where you just replace some of the components on the board to get it at the correct levels. There's others where you do just a basic bypass, so you pull the RGBS pins, separate it to a new board and use that. And then there's some of the newer ones coming out that are a little crazy. And I think all of those are going to have completely different outputs. Completely different for crazy people like me that, that pay attention to the strange details. Your average person probably wouldn't be able to tell from any of them, but it's a tough question, and I'd like to dig into that at some point, but I want to wait for some of the crazier Neo Geo RGB mods to be finished, and then jump back into seeing more comparisons and updating the page on my site that kind of shows what's the best ones to get. Because I have a feeling after seeing some of these mods, whether it's just the component swap, so a dollar's worth of parts, or all the way up to the crazy one, I think there's going to be a lot more options for people for both MVS and AES in order to get really great quality. Well, that's it for this week. Thanks so much to everybody that participates in these Q&As. I really, I enjoy doing it, and I also enjoy feeling like I'm at least trying to give back to the amazing Patreon subscribers. So thank you for participating. I hope it's at least a little bit of a help. And as always, any questions that you'd like, post in the Patreon page for this week's, and I'll answer those next week. So thanks again. I'll see you next time.